When people talk about evolution, whether it's universities or the experts talk about it, or natural historians, they really talk about one form of evolution. And in reality, I believe that that's not really correct. There are two different kinds of evolutionary models that we can look at. And one of them, I believe to be absolutely right, and I'll give you my reasons, and the other one to be wrong, for obvious reasons. The one that most experts, and you too, I believe, think is this one, the seed model of evolution, or there is the acorn model of evolution. And most people that believe in the seed model, I believe, are wrong, and I'll give you my reasons why. Because they are very different realities. With the acorn model, what you have is a tree, but with the seed model, what you have are different weeds and plants all over the place. They're totally disjointed. They're just sitting around making more seeds. The wind blows those seeds and they become disjointed and spread everywhere. And what you then have here is a plethora of life forms. You actually look at everything and you say, there's a tiger, there's an elephant, there's a human being, there's a mushroom, there's a oak tree, etc. And you see the universe as, sorry, not the universe, planet Earth, because there isn't life form anywhere else. It's the only one we know of. Instead of looking at it as fragments of DNA, you look at them as a plethora of life, which is what most Darwinists see the evolution of life on planet Earth. In my opinion, that's completely wrong, because there is only one life form on this planet, and that is DNA. And that DNA has evolved from a single acorn, Luca, last universal common ancestor. And what we're looking at now is that same acorn that has grown into a big tree, the big tree of life. So he is the immortal mortal. He's dead, obviously, that's why he's mortal, but he's immortal in the sense that obviously an amazing guy, and his insight into natural algorithms is frightening. This is what he scratched in his notebook, very earlier on when he was doing his work on the I wouldn't call it theory of evolution. It's not a theory by any stretch of the bloody imagination. It's just an observation, and it's as solid as looking at an apple on a table and saying there is an apple on the table. The process of evolution on Earth or life is as real as that. So it's not a theory, not even close to it. It is an observation, and you either want to make that observation and you don't want to make an observation, and that's fair enough. If you don't want to make the observation, then don't. But if you make it, you cannot escape the reality of what it actually is. But my point here is that what you're looking at here is the very first portrait of the only living organism that has ever existed as far as we know, that has existed in the universe, and that is the tree of life itself. So the organism isn't C or B or whatever the hell it is, even though Darwin might have seen it that way, but inadvertently he actually sketches the portrait of the only life form that exists. Why? Why do I say that? So the sequence of symbioses. Now, if you look at the sequence of symbiosis, you can very quickly see, and you can distinguish the seed model from the acorn model. And that is that the seed model sees many life forms. So all of these it sees as distinctive life forms. And not only that, it sees them in conflict with one another, and it sees them killing and ripping each other apart, which is, of course, what it is. Because if you've looked at the blind watchmaker video before, I said to you, when you're blind and you want to make a watch, how do you do it? You bang parts together and hope that at some point the right parts would assemble and you would get the symbiosis, which is where eukaryotic cells come from, through the motive of eating one another, to one bacteria eating another one. We had cells with mitochondria and chloroplast, for example. So this model is wrong because it sees too many different plethora of life forms on the planet, which is of course the obvious observation to make. You look out your window and this is what you see. It does not recognize external symbioses. It actually sees it as competition, and it sees it as selection pressures on one another, which in a way of course it is, but it is not negative. It is entirely a positive interaction, even though it's predation, even as though parasitosis, and even though it's bacteria and virus infections. They're all the blind search for symbiosis. So that's where it fails, and it doesn't. And it sees, as I said, competition, predation, and parasitosis, and infection as destructive events. In other words, they will kill us, it will give us the, like the dead guy here. That they are not in any way positive, which is completely wrong. That's not the case. So the ACON model is the inevitable right one. So if you take time, you don't have to agree with me. Just give us some time and look at the evidence. See what do you see. It is very difficult to see and accept it, but that is because of our vantage point. The reason we have a difficulty seeing it is because we are one of these. For example, if your name is Malcolm, you are one of these acorns and I'm one of these leaves, and we're looking at each other and everyone else, but we can't see the tree. We just see different leaves and we see different acorns, and we name them. This is Steve, this is Tiger, this is Pig, and we can't see the tree of life itself and the connectivities. But we can. That's where science comes in, because we can actually step back and look at it through our mind's eye and see the real connections that exist. So there are many problems with this subjective reality, because, as I discussed it before, our minds are limited to our hardware and our vantage point. It is difficult to see the tree when you are an acorn. You're just on a branch, surely. So, but if you look for yourself for the evidence and count the number of primary, secondary, tertiary, quaternary, and so on symbioses within different fragments of DNA, on planet Earth, you can see nothing but a symbiotic connection. You will see an interconnecting web. Every single bit depends on the other one, either directly or indirectly, and not just simply because of primary symbiosis. For example, the primary symbiosis, an example would be of mitochondria within your cell, of two bacteria that try to eat one another, or your primary symbiosis will be between you and the bacteria in your guts that digest the food for you. And then there are the secondary ones, which we'll discuss in a minute. There will be the farm animals. And then if you look at the tertiary ones, these are the ones like bugs, worms, fungi, etc., and mosses that recycle the food. Because if you really think about it, although you look at nature and it looks beautiful, but in reality you do know what nature is. Nature is a rotting ground of DNA fragments. You're actually living, breathing, and sleeping in a graveyard of DNA. It's just decomposing all around you, and these things are recycling all the nutrients to go back and to help other fragments. So this is an example of the soil cycle of what happens to leaves when they fall and they then turn back, and all of these fragments of DNA involved. Without all of these, you would be dead. You'd have no food. You could not exist. So look at the connections. That is not a seed model. It's impossible to think of that as a seed model. The keystone symbiosis, for example, there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that without domestication of animals, of all of the animals that we have relationships with, we would not exist. Why do I call them symbiosis when we're just eating these guys? Well, it's not really what I would call true symbiosis, because there is a gravitational element in there, in that it seems to be predominantly on the face of it one-sided, but it isn't really, because if you think about it, these guys would not exist in the numbers that they exist and in the geographical distribution that they exist without humans. That gives them an enormous survival advantage, because they've already, the numbers are there and the distribution is there, which they could not have achieved. A dog would not be in Australia, a horse probably wouldn't be in Australia, and I don't know, some other animals that we have taken from one place to another, which have destroyed some aspects. But my point is here that it is a symbiotic relationship. Without this guy, without dogs, I am absolutely convinced that humans could not have evolved without our symbiotic relationship with dogs from the very, very early stages of hominids, and our relationship with wolves, and they becoming tamed and then becoming part of our, for example, the Inuits, could they have existed in without dogs, or without seals, or without reindeer? No, because where does the food come from? Where does the skin come from? We have none of those. We have to get it from somewhere else. There are a symbiotic relationship between viruses. You have to know a lot about genes and genetics, which I don't, but there are. We use viruses in many ways that help us, and they will probably help us even more in the future. But bacteria have always been there. Your gut's full of it, and you digest food. We've even used poisons from frogs for hunting, and poisons for cancer treatment from snakes, from other things, from natural products. Our medicines come from nature, or at least they began to come from nature. And so you can see all of the connections that we have with every other fragment of DNA, and that is not a seed model. We are connected irrevocably. We cannot exist for a moment without other fragments of DNA. If today the whole Earth was taken, that we were the only creatures remaining on Earth, and you took everything else out of it, we would not last for minutes. At first, there would be no oxygen, or there would be no food, etc. You see my point. So anyway, there are other cyclical symbioses. We have the oxygen cycle, which is very actively controlled by fragments of DNA, which are trees and algae and so on, the oceans and so on, and how the animals come into the whole process. We have the carbon cycle, which is the carbon dioxide cycle, of how that is recycled. Every bit of the information that you put together, you come with the only solution, that the two models, out of the two models, which is the seed or the acorn model, the model that we are living in, the real model is the acorn model, and we are just a leaf on the oak tree of life, if you like, and the other model just doesn't fit. Anyway, if you need a more complete systematic explanation of the point raised here, please get this book. It's completely free as Kindle ebook. I don't want anything from you. It may help you look at things a bit better, and hopefully inspire you to come up with the right answers. You don't have to accept mine, because an unexamined life is not a human life. It's just the life of an accelerated animal, which is fundamentally, I think, what we're living in now. And an unexamined truth are just opinions, and of course the internet is full of idiots with their opinions and nonsense, and that is one of the catastrophes of the modern world, in which the public platform has been desecrated by the noise of every idiot on a soapbox, which is what social media has given them. Not everybody needs to be heard, probably including me, but anyway. Unchallenged establishment are just cults, which is what our education system has increasingly become. It's territorial, it's an elite business, and since the most educated have the most power in the world, and yet they cause the most damage, then that education system is fundamentally toxic and malignant. Thanks.